Hello, and welcome to today's SMA's Town Hall. I'm Alan Berman, member of the Management Consulting Team, and joining us today is long-term associate Chuck Bohle. We're going to be discussing the legendary Kelly Johnson and Lockheed Skunk Works. I've taken AJ's and Jock's cue and worn the appropriate hat. I'll take that off now. Because of the length of time we're going to be devoting to today's main topic, Art Talk number 170 on the American modern artist and colorist extraordinaire Milton Avery can be found directly on the SMA Wins YouTube channel. Skunk Works is an official nickname for Lockheed Martin Aeronautics Advanced Development Programs organization. It's responsible for next generation aircraft designs, highly classified research and development programs, and exotic aircraft platforms. The name Skunk Works was adapted from a comic strip at the time and is now a Lockheed Martin registered trademark. Despite the name being owned by Lockheed, it's widely used in business and technical fields to describe a group within an organization that does innovative and secretive projects. Kelly Johnson founded this Lockheed group, and he would become a legend in his own right for his leadership of Skunk Works and the contributions to a series of important aircraft designs, most notably the Lockheed U-2 and the SR-71 Blackbird. As we get into this discussion, please type any questions in the chat and we'll discuss them at the end of the little presentation that Chuck and I have. So, Chuck, what caused you to think about discussing Kelly Johnson and the Skunk Works?
Well, as I listened to the recent discussion about Elon Musk, I thought about Kelly because he was another remarkable person. I worked for him early in my career.
So, when was Kelly Johnson's time at Lockheed and the Skunk Works?
Well, he joined Lockheed in 1933. He became the chief engineer of the Lockheed Burbank plant in 1952, and he became the vice president of advanced development projects in 1958. I joined Skunk Works in 1964 at the age of 26. I was probably one of the very few people under the age of 30, and I'm probably likely to be one of the last people alive who actually worked for Kelly.
Wow. So why don't we start talking about the Skunk Works?
Well, Kelly described the essence of the Skunk Works like this. It's that a small number of qualified, focused, and empowered people working in the right environment could achieve very difficult objectives quickly at a modest cost. The Skunk Works has been extensively documented, studied, debated, and discussed for more than 30 years, 50 years. It was a model for an effective way to develop and produce complex systems in a relatively short period of time at far lower than normal cost. It seemed like a winning objective that DoD should adopt universally, but sadly, it doesn't.
Yeah, I've read a couple of the books on the Skunk Works, including Ben Rich's great memoir of his time there. Is the Skunk Works still active?
Yeah, Skunk Works still continues with operations at Palmdale, California, and some people at Lockheed's other aero facilities at Fort Worth and Marietta. It still provides excellent services. However, today Skunk Works cannot operate in the manner defined by Kelly Johnson. Our national policies for acquiring new weapon systems do not align themselves with Kelly's business principles.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Kelly and how he led the Skunk Works.
Well, he was born in 1910, died in 1990, so he lived 80 years. His technical capabilities became evident early in life. At age 13, Kelly won a prize for his first aircraft design. He went to the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor, where he received a BS and master's degree in aeronautical engineering. He joined the Lockheed Aircraft Company in Burbank and quickly rose based on his technical talents. He soon had the attention of senior management. They finally granted him the opportunity to initiate an advanced development group based on some different management principles that he had formulated. He continued to exhibit extraordinary technical capabilities, but it was his management principles that are his lasting legacy.
So why was he so important?
Well, Kelly played a leading role in the design of more than 40 aircraft. He acquired a reputation of being one of the most talented and prolific aircraft design engineers in the history of aviation. Aviation and Space Technology magazine ranked Johnson as the eighth on its top list of 100 most important, most interesting, and most influential people in the first century of aerospace.
So let's get a little more specific about his accomplishments.
Yeah, well, this is a partial list of the programs that he really led. Most of us will only recall a few of these airplanes on the screen. I certainly recall the Electra, the Constellation, and F-104. The F-104 and Electra were in production when I joined Lockheed.
Wow, that really is quite a list. I know a little bit about the story of the P-80 as the first American jet-powered fighter in World War II. That's probably a good story for another day. So the last two on this list are really the most famous, the U-2 and the Blackbird. Let's spend some time talking about those.
Okay, let's start with the U-2. The U-2 mission was intelligence gathering, a spy plane. The original U-2A flew in 1955. It was capable of flying at 70,000 feet with a range of about 3,000 miles. By the way, that contract was underrun by about 20%. That doesn't happen anymore.
No.
It was followed by a larger, more capable U-2R, which first took flight in 1967. This first flight took place within 12 months after the contract award that authorized the design. It was a current technology aircraft that used existing engines and equipment, but doing this in 12 months is impressive. U-2s are scheduled to be retired in 2026. Here's a picture of Kelly with Gary Powers, the pilot who was shot down flying the U-2 over Russia. Gary Powers had been captured by the Russians when they shot down his U-2. He was released in a trade with the U.S. As a condition of his release, he was not allowed to continue flying for the U.S. government. Kelly hired him to be one of the pilots that the Skunk Works used to transport personnel on business trips. He was my pilot on a number of trips.
Wow, that's really something. Southern California people might remember him also for his later career as being the helicopter news reporter for KNBC. Anyway, let's move on to the Blackbirds.
Okay, there are four variants. By the way, the SR-71 was actually an RS-71, as is the standard designation for all reconnaissance aircraft. However, when President Johnson announced its existence, he called it an SR-71. The president cannot be right, so we immediately changed the designation throughout our facility. So while U-2 was operationally successful, there were concerns that Russia was making substantial technology advances and the U-2 would become vulnerable. As noted earlier, that did happen. And in November of 1958, a CIA review panel held a crucial meeting and agreed that it was probably feasible to build an aircraft capable of speeds and altitudes that would make it virtually undetectable by radar. President Eisenhower was briefed and he agreed with the panel's recommendations. Lockheed and Conver were asked to submit proposals and funds were made available. In July 1959, the president was again briefed and he approved the program. The Lockheed design was selected. The program was called Oxcart, and the aircraft was designated as the A-11, which was implemented, became the A-12.
So what were some of the technical challenges associated with the Blackbird for something that
Oh
was
my
able
God,
to fly so fast and so high?
it's a really long list. Due to time constraints, I will just cover a few. Firstly, the extreme temperatures led to the first use of titanium in an aircraft structure. This required a new level of knowledge, including new machining tools to deal with the hard metal. Tires were unbelievable, small, and they were 22 ply filled with 300 pounds of nitrogen, and they were really hard and only good for about 10 takeoffs and landings. Pilots had to taxi to the start of the takeoff position and wait for the tires to cool off before proceeding down the runway to take off. The lubricating oil was capable of withstanding 600 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures at a cost of what would be today about $600 a gallon. The engine inlets operated with a control system that pushed them forward or back. inside the nacelle, depending upon the speed and altitude.
Wow. Altogether, that's a crazy set of challenges. How was Kelly Johnson able to achieve these results and really achieve the results on a repeatable basis?
Well, over time, Kelly created a set of principles and operational rules that define the relationship between stakeholders and sponsors. These ideas were captured and summarized into a 14 rules that formed his management philosophy. Some of these rules have to be interpreted today because the changes in technology available now enable management to perform functions in a very different manner. But the rules were all about cutting back on bureaucracy and eliminating low value oversight and empowering small teams, ensuring accountability, and creating trust between the customer and the contractor. To highlight just a few, number 10, Alan, can we bleep that guiding principles? That sort of obscures the
Sure. We'll put in the chat
visual.
a link to the 14 principles on
Oh,
the Lockheed
okay.
site.
Anyway, number 10 was around the need for stable requirements. That makes sense. The specifications that really matter must be agreed to in advance of the contract being signed. It's all about being good with not satisfying all of what used to be called mil specs, which was then the terminology that was later replaced by the current FAR. Number 2, 3, and 14 are around having small teams, limiting the number of people involved, but still rewarding them based on performance, not the size of the organization. Number 12 is about trust and communication. That really underpins everything. The absence of trust is what drives high levels of oversight, reporting, and bureaucracy. Trust leads to delegation of responsibility as described in rules number 1, 7, 8, and 9. Current DoD management style reflects the notion that contractors cannot be trusted. After a contract award, now the government assumes that oversight must be conducted constantly at a very detailed level. Kelly's notion of good communication was to pick up the telephone whenever anything important ever occurred and not wait for the formal reporting cycle. Because of that, the CIA did not attempt to intrude on the design development process.
So what are the principles that still apply today?
Well, let's start with responsibilities that you have to have responsibilities commensurate with the authority to take the action. Okay. This is a basic management principle, but it's often overlooked. Kelly reported to the Lockheed corporate president. By the way, the customer counterpart leader also has to have the required level of authority. Decisions need to be made quickly. And then the culture of the company is key. Employees must learn to work as a team. As just one example, the responsibilities of engineers must extend beyond the design development process. Engineers must be available to help the factory and also deal with field problems. An example of trust and empowerment, on my last day at the Skunk Works, I was given the opportunity to finalize and sign off on the next year's Blackbird support contracts. At 7:30 in the morning, I got on our airplane and was flown to March Air Force Base, where I met the government contracting team. We reviewed and finalized the unresolved issues, and I signed off on behalf of the Skunk Works. I flew back home and was back in the office by 3:30 p.m. Can you imagine a 32-year-old supervisor being given the authority to finalize and sign off on a $500 million contract?
Yeah, not today.
The next thing is test failures are to be expected when new requirements require new technologies. We learn from failures. The Blackbird performance requirements were defined in a 50-page document that focused on what these airplanes must be able to do. The current DoD practices often result in hundreds of pages that now include how the requirements are to be achieved. So on the one hand, contractors are presumed to know a great deal about how to achieve the requirements, but then the R&D contract often takes years at the cost of billions. By the way, it cost Lockheed Martin $100 million to prepare the proposal for the F-35. Currently, there's the inevitable scope creep syndrome leads to major cost overruns. The Skunk Works was not objected to any of these kinds of scope creep issues on either the U-2 or the Blackbird programs. And then Kelly promoted using whatever he could from the past. Yeah, why reinvent if it's not necessary? Trust is a huge issue. The CIA management team that had oversight of the Blackbird contracts was limited to about 30 people. They did not micromanage the Skunk Works. Give you a contrast, the F-35 program has more than 2,100 people at an annual cost of more than 100 million. And while the F-35 program office has greater responsibilities, including the interface with other nations, Lockheed Martin has many, many people in place that just respond to queries from the F-35 program office personnel. Next issue has to do with program flight testing. Flight testing provides very valuable insights that need to be comprehended by industry. Military personnel are rotated frequently at a rate far greater than industry, so much of the knowledge gained by DoD personnel doing flight testing is lost and will not be reflected by the contractors in the next generation of airplanes. Kelly recognized that a lot of people don't really want to be responsible for supervision, and he concentrated on the notion that you pay for what they do and not necessarily how many people they have. By the way, interesting in the way of compensation. In 1966, I received a bonus at what would be about $10,000 in current economics. I was just a supervisor level. Next thing had to do with documentation. Kelly stated that all important work had to be documented and reported. This included technical, schedule, and financial reporting. DoD contracts currently have truly vast reporting requirements. Preparing these reports is very costly and presumes that somebody on the government side is actually studying them very carefully and directs the contractor to make corrective action. This is just one indicator of the standard DoD practices often infringe on or duplicate contractor responsibilities.
Yeah, Chuck, you're right. These are all really relevant. Can you provide any insights into other things about Kelly that were really important?
Well, first of all, I can't overstress that integrity is very important. It's integral to gaining trust. Kelly was clear that, while the Skunk Works was in business to make money, there were standards of behavior that had to be met while doing so. And we should briefly touch on Kelly as a person. He had what I call presence. When he was making a speech, he spoke at moderate levels of speed and volume. His body language and vocal delivery conveyed a strong sense of competency. He was a good communicator. He used short sentences and commonly used understood words. He was a bit whimsical and injected small bits of humor.
How did you become a member of the Skunk Works?
That's an interesting tale. I joined Lockheed California company in Burbank after getting my bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering from Cal Berkeley in 1961. I had decided not to be an engineer and accepted a financial position. I worked on the other side of the Lockheed Burbank organization for 3 years. One day my manager called me in and said that another organization called Advanced Development Projects wanted to interview me for a job. But nobody knew what ADP did. On the appointed day, I drove to the location where I was to be met. It was a small single-story building in front of a much larger two-story windowless building, which was in front of a huge, much taller building that had glazed windows. I was met by a guy who introduced himself, and he asked some seemingly innocuous questions. He seemed to already know a lot about me. After about 10 minutes, he said, "I can't offer you a raise, and I can't tell you what we do, but I think you'll find it interesting." Who could resist such a tempting offer? I accepted. 2 weeks later, I started my new job. I was taken into the badging process, and my boss then took me to my new office in the two-story building. It was a large room with about 5 other people and a desk for me. My boss then took me into the huge building next door, and this is what I saw. Oh, God. I was amazed as we walked around and I saw the bunch of blackbirds in various stages of assembly. Many of the A-12s had already been completed and were flying at Area 51. You should understand this was a black program at the time, so the public had no idea about the blackbird's appearance, much less its existence. I was amazed to see such a distinctive looking airplane.
Hmm.
Blackbirds first flew in 1962 and operated at its altitudes and speeds that have never been exceeded for a manned airplane. They could go about 22 miles an hour or Mach 3 plus. Well, to give you some sense of Kelly's whimsical style, he much later was asked what it was about the airplanes that made it go so fast. So instead of attempting a deep technical answer, he simply said, "We made it pointy." This was just an example of how personable Kelly was.
That's really something.
Kelly was gone due quite a bit due to his many extracurricular duties, coordinating, consulting with other senior management and mostly government people. But he empowered his management team to do what was necessary. You know, bottom line is Kelly was just a major influence in my long-term view of how to perform my duties and empower all of the things I had to do much later. I applied most of his philosophies later in my career and at one time when I had the greater challenge of managing not just 7, but rather 485 people.
Wow. These are really some amazing stories, Chuck. Let's open it up to some questions from the audience. There were a couple of questions that I saw in the chat. One was, Kelly Johnson was really young when he started the Skunk Works, and he was actually given quite a bit of authority. Do you know who the president of Lockheed was at the time that delegated all that authority to him?
The president was a guy named Daniel Houghton. And Kelly was relentless, and he was, he had formed these ideas about what to do and how to do it, and he became a pest. And so they finally gave him the opportunity. He said, "Go do it."
Interesting. So you talked a lot about the history and there must have been a very unique culture at the Skunk Works at the time to make it work the way it was working. And I'm curious if you have any insights into the current culture of the Skunk Works and how it is or isn't holding up to those standards.
No, I really don't. Both AJ and I knew Frank Capuccio, who's I think now retired, and I think that he attempted to, but the real difference is not the internal management philosophy. It's what's changed is the fact that the government just doesn't really want to operate that way. They have this notion of contractors basically are not to be trusted, and so they now infringe on what should be rightfully contractor responsibilities. So I suspect there's still lots of good cultural attributes operating in the Skunk Works, but it just the government doesn't want to do things that way.
Yeah, so our experience has been that the people there really want to continue being innovative and somewhat free and hold to those values. But as you said, the acquisition environment just makes it that much harder to continue along those lines. And so I think Skunk Works management has actually been very actively trying to preserve that culture in the face of these external forces that are really just making it a lot more complicated.
Yeah, pretty sad situation.
One of the questions was around if the Skunk Works collaborated with other companies, if they worked with Boeing or JPL or companies like that, or if it was just really working directly for the customer and had their suppliers.
Well, Kelly as a person, was prone to be proactive. So I don't know to what extent he coached or discussed things with other companies. I think he did. Certainly, all of our associate um, contractors like P&W and all the subcontractors we had, um, the, he imparted his philosophy to all of them, and we treated them the same way. We didn't intrude on the responsibilities of our subs. We held them accountable, but you know, you got to let people do what they're responsible for.
Right, right. I had heard a story that there was in working with the subcontractors, there was such a high level of secrecy associated with the programs that things weren't really shipped to Lockheed in Burbank, but there was some other maybe shell company or other
That's
company
right.
name and
Yeah.
some warehouse somewhere in the
It was,
area.
yeah, it was called the J.E. Ramsey Company, and J.E. Ramsey was the guy that was in charge of procurement in the Skunk Works. So all of our procurement was with respect to the customer. We were the J.E. Ramsey Company.
Oh, that is funny. Um, one of the comments in the chat was around Kelly not having 14 rules, but actually 15 rules. And I was not aware of that. And one of them, so the comment here was that the 15th rule, which was later deleted, was don't do business with the Navy.
That comment was from a very, very knowledgeable person.
Yes. All right. Are there any other questions that we might want to bring up? We just have another minute or two to.
Where does the symbol of a skunk come from?
I didn't hear that.
Where, Chuck, the question was, where does the skunk symbol come from?
It came from a cartoon, and really, that's sort of a mystery. So there are many versions about how that all got started, but it became a symbol. It just is. I don't think it logically makes any sense.
One of the stories that I read was that I think the facility was kind of smelly, and I don't know if it was one of the manufacturing processes that made it so. And so people started answering the phone, Skunk Works,
Yeah.
because of the smell. And then that was from that cartoon, this little Abner cartoon from the time, and then that got changed to because they were infringing on a copyright or a trademark. They changed it to the Skunk Works, and just the rest became history.
So
Anyway,
there's one other thing that
yeah,
might be interesting. It has to do with the existence or lack of existence of things called policies and procedures. I don't recall ever having to read an official policy or procedure while I was in the Skunk Works, but that didn't mean that I wasn't aware. Um, I was tutored by three more senior people. I mean, they took me under their wing and they coached me continually through the entire process. I mean, I had coaching at a detail level that was unbelievable. And that's one of the things that I carried forward as I grew in my responsibilities later in life.
there was another question here around the CIA paying in cash. So Chuck, since you were on the business side, do you know if that was true that the CIA paid in cash instead of other means?
What I know is that we established a relationship with a payment office in Sacramento, and Kelly was very keen on maintaining cash flow. So once a month, we flew up to Sacramento. I did that several times and picked up a check and brought it back. This is the day before wire transfers, so everything had to be done with some sort of a piece of paper. But if that's what we call cash, I guess so be it. It came out of Sacramento.
Okay. There was one other question about the Blackbird and the tires. Did they ever come up with a solution to the Blackbird tires being too hot to land on?
No, you can't. It's a combination. I mean, tires have to flex. And if you can imagine, if you have 22 ply and the inside pressure is 300 psi, that tire still has to flex, but it flexes, and while it does that, because of the construction, there's a tremendous amount of heat buildup, and the tires were designed to be very, very small, and that's why they had to be 22 plies with all that internal pressure. So there was no long-term solution to that problem. We just rotated them about every 10 takeoff and landings.
Right. All right. So Chuck, thank you very much. We're just out of time. That was a fascinating look at the legendary Skunk Works and Kelly Johnson, really from an insider. I bet you have a number of additional stories to tell, and some you can't.
Yeah.
For next week's town hall,
directly,
Jacques will be giving a training presentation on EVMS, so Earned Value Management Systems. Be sure to join us for that. So thank you, everybody, for joining. Have a good day.
Thank you.